At first, Luca Magnotta didn't look like someone capable of violence. He was slim, soft-spoken, carefully groomed, and constantly chasing attention. Online, he posted photos of himself endlessly creating different identities, trying to be noticed in modeling circles and adult film websites. Fame mattered to him more than anything. Being seen mattered more than being understood. But behind the screen, Luca's life was unstable. He moved often, changed names, and told stories about himself that weren't true. He wanted recognition, but it never came in the way he imagined. Over time, the need to be noticed grew stronger, and his behavior became more disturbing. In the spring of 2012, Luca was living in Montreal. That's where he met Jun Lin, a 33-year-old international student from China who was studying at Concordia University. Jun Lin had come to Canada to build a future. Friends described him as kind, polite, and trusting. He had no idea that one ordinary decision would place him in the path of someone dangerous. On the 24th of May 2012, Jun Lin went to Luca Magnotta's apartment. It was the last time anyone would see him alive. Inside that apartment, something horrifying happened. Police later confirmed that Jun Lin was killed there. The crime was not impulsive. It was deliberate and controlled. What followed showed a level of calculation that shocked even experienced investigators. After the killing, Luca Magnotta did not immediately flee. Instead, he took time. He dismembered Jun Lin's body and carefully packaged the remains. Then, in an act that stunned the entire country, he mailed body parts to political offices across Canada. One package was sent to the Conservative Party headquarters in Ottawa. Others followed. As the packages were discovered, panic spread. Authorities realized they were dealing with something far more serious than a single homicide. A nationwide investigation began, and Luca Magnotta's name quickly surfaced as the prime suspect. When police went to his Montreal apartment, Magnotta was already gone. He had fled the country. Canadian authorities issued an international alert. Luca Magnotta's photo was released to the public, and media outlets around the world picked up the story. His face appeared on television screens, newspapers, and websites across continents. Ironically, the attention he had always wanted had finally arrived, but now it was because of murder. For days, Magnotta moved across Europe. He traveled using false identities, stopping in different cities, while police tracked his movements. The case became a global manhunt, with international law enforcement agencies working together to find him. The search ended on the 4th of June, 2012, in Berlin, Germany. Police found Luca Magnotta sitting inside an internet cafe. According to reports, he was reading news articles about himself when officers walked in. He did not resist arrest. There was no struggle. He simply looked up as if the moment had been inevitable. Magnotta was taken into custody and later extradited back to Canada. His return to Montreal was heavily guarded and widely covered by the media. By then, the case had become one of the most infamous crimes in Canadian history. The trial began in 2014. Prosecutors laid out every detail, from Jun Lin's disappearance to the evidence found in Magnotta's apartment to his movements across Europe. The court heard about the planning, the deception, and the extreme actions taken after the killing. Magnotta's defense argued that he suffered from mental health issues. They claimed he was not fully responsible for his actions, but the jury reviewed weeks of testimony, forensic evidence, and digital records that painted a clear picture. In December 2014, Luca Magnotta was found guilty of first-degree murder. Under Canadian law, first-degree murder carries a mandatory life sentence. The judge ruled that Magnotta would spend the rest of his life in prison with no chance of parole for at least 25 years. Additional sentences were added for related crimes, but they were served concurrently with the life sentence. For Jun Lin's family, the verdict brought no true closure. Their son had come to Canada seeking education and opportunity. Instead, his life ended in a crime that became known around the world for its brutality. Luca Magnotta achieved what he had always wanted: global attention. But the cost was irreversible. A life was taken, a family was destroyed, and the name he worked so hard to make famous would forever be tied to one of the darkest crimes in modern Canadian history. For years, Danny Masterson was a familiar face in American homes. Millions of viewers knew him as a sarcastic, confident character from hit television shows. On screen, he played someone carefree and sharp-tongued, a presence that felt safe, even charming. His career seemed solid, his future secure, and his public image carefully protected. But long before courtrooms and prison sentences entered his life, there were women quietly carrying memories they couldn't escape. The incidents that would eventually destroy Masterson's career happened in the early 2000s. At the time, he was rising in Hollywood, surrounded by fame parties and influence. According to court records, 3 women later came forward, each describing being sexually assaulted by Masterson inside his Hollywood Hills home. These were not strangers. They were people who trusted him, people who felt safe around someone they believed they knew. After the assaults, the women reported what happened, but instead of justice, they encountered delays, doubt, and silence. Years passed. Careers continued. Life moved on for the public. But for the victims, the trauma stayed. One of the most disturbing elements that later emerged was the environment surrounding Masterson at the time. He was a prominent member of the Church of Scientology. During the trial, prosecutors explained that the women felt pressured not to go to law enforcement. They described intimidation, isolation, and fear. Some said they were discouraged from reporting the crimes or felt trapped within a system that made speaking out feel dangerous. For years, nothing seemed to happen. Then in June 2020, everything changed. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office officially charged Danny Masterson with 3 counts of rape. The announcement shocked the entertainment industry. A well-known sitcom actor was now facing life-altering criminal charges. Masterson pleaded not guilty and maintained his innocence. The first trial began in 2022. Inside the courtroom, the women testified in detail about what they experienced. They described the setting, the fear, and the lasting impact on their lives. The jury listened carefully, but when deliberations ended, they could not reach a unanimous decision. The judge declared a mistrial. For many victims, a mistrial feels like the justice system taking a step backward. For the women in this case, it meant waiting again, reliving everything again, facing uncertainty again. A second trial was scheduled in 2023. This time the prosecution presented its case once more, walking the jury through years of evidence, witness testimony, and survivor accounts. The women spoke again, their voices steady but heavy with emotion. Prosecutors emphasized patterns in Masterson's behavior and the similarities between the accounts. The defense argued that the accusations were exaggerated or untrue. They questioned credibility and suggested alternative explanations. But the jury studied the full picture. In May 2023, after weeks of testimony, the jury reached a verdict. Danny Masterson was found guilty on 2 counts of rape. The third charge resulted in no verdict, as jurors could not agree. Still, the convictions marked a turning point. For the first time, Masterson was no longer a television star in the public eye. He was a convicted felon. Sentencing took place on the 7th of September, 2023. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Survivors delivered impact statements describing how the assaults had changed their lives. They spoke about fear, lost trust, and the years they spent waiting for accountability. Family members sat quietly listening. The judge explained that California law requires severe punishment for rape by force. Each conviction carried a sentence of 15 years to life. Because the crimes involved separate victims, the judge ordered the sentences to be served consecutively. Danny Masterson was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. That structure meant he would not be eligible for parole for at least 3 decades. Even then, release would not be guaranteed. For many legal experts, such a sentence often results in a person spending the rest of their life behind bars. After sentencing, Masterson was taken into custody immediately. In December 2023, he was transferred to a California state prison to begin serving his sentence. His legal team continued to file appeals, arguing that errors were made during the trial. But as of now, the conviction stands. For the survivors, the verdict did not erase the past, but it confirmed something they had waited years to hear, that their voices mattered, and that the justice system, however slow, could still move forward. Danny Masterson once lived in the spotlight, admired by fans who laughed at his jokes and followed his career. Today his legacy is no longer defined by television roles, but by the lives he harmed and the consequences that followed. Fame did not protect him forever. Time did not erase the truth. And the silence that lasted for years eventually broke. Before his name appeared in headlines, Ali Abulaban was known to thousands of people online as Jin Kid. He built a following on TikTok and Instagram by impersonating famous movie characters, copying voices, accents, and expressions with surprising accuracy. His videos were short, funny, and easy to share. To many viewers, he seemed like a talented creator on the verge of something bigger. Behind the camera, however, Ali's personal life was unraveling. He was married to Anna Abulaban, and together they had a young daughter. At first, their life looked stable from the outside. But according to court records, their relationship became increasingly toxic. Arguments grew more frequent. Trust disappeared. By 2021, Anna had decided the marriage was over. She asked Ali to move out of their high-rise apartment in San Diego. Ali did move out, but he didn't let go. Prosecutors later explained that Ali secretly kept a copy of the apartment key. More disturbingly, he used his daughter's iPad to access a listening application that allowed him to hear what was happening inside the apartment remotely. Without Anna's knowledge, he was monitoring her private life. On the 21st of October 2021, Ali listened through the app and believed Anna was inside the apartment with another man, Rayburn Cummings, a friend she had invited over. That moment triggered everything. Ali rushed to the apartment building. He entered using the hidden key and went up to the 35th floor. Inside, he found Anna and Rayburn together. According to evidence presented in court, what happened next was fast and violent. Ali pulled out a handgun and shot both of them multiple times. Anna died at the scene. Rayburn also died from his injuries. The apartment, once a shared home, became the site of a double homicide. After the shootings, Ali did not immediately surrender. Instead, he called his mother and spoke about what he had done. Then, he left the building. In an action that shocked many people following the case, he drove to pick up his young daughter from school. Police soon located him during a traffic stop and took him into custody without resistance. The news spread quickly. A popular social media figure was now charged with killing his wife and another man. Many of Ali's followers struggled to reconcile the entertainer they saw online with the violence described in police reports. The case moved toward trial, and prosecutors began building a detailed timeline. They presented evidence showing preparation and intent. This included the secret copy of the key, the use of the listening app, and the steps Ali took leading up to the shootings. Prosecutors argued that this was not a sudden, uncontrollable act. They said it was planned. The defense argued that Ali acted in the heat of the moment, overwhelmed by emotion and betrayal. They suggested he was not thinking clearly and did not fully understand his actions at the time. But witnesses painted a different picture. Testimony showed that Anna had been afraid of Ali and wanted distance from him. Messages and statements revealed a pattern of control and obsession. The jury listened to weeks of testimony, reviewed digital evidence, and examined the timeline carefully. In May 2024, the jury reached a verdict. Ali Abulaban was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The conviction confirmed that the killings were intentional. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy as the verdict was read. Family members of the victims listened quietly. Years of tension ended in a single moment. Sentencing took place on the 6th of September 2024. The judge explained that the law required severe punishment for first-degree murder. Ali was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Additional years were added because a firearm was used. The sentence meant one thing. Clearly, Ali Abulaban would spend the rest of his life in prison. For Anna's family, the loss was permanent. A daughter lost her mother. Loved ones lost someone they cared deeply about. For Rayburn's family, the pain was just as lasting. 2 lives ended in one violent act fueled by control and obsession. Ali Abulaban once made people laugh with short videos online. He chased attention, views, and recognition. In the end, that online identity disappeared, replaced by a prison number and a life sentence. The case became a grim reminder that violence does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from inside relationships that are already breaking apart. And when control turns into obsession, the consequences can be irreversible. For years, Ryan Grantham was seen as a quiet success story. He started acting when he was still a child and grew up in front of cameras, appearing in television shows and movies that reached millions of viewers. Audiences recognized him as a calm, soft-spoken character, someone who seemed gentle and harmless. From the outside, his future looked promising. Behind that image, Ryan was struggling. By 2020, he was living in Squamish, British Columbia with his mother, Barbara Waite. Barbara was a teacher known by friends and colleagues as kind, patient, and deeply supportive of her son. She believed in Ryan even as his mental health worsened. According to court records, Ryan had been dealing with depression and emotional instability for years. He felt overwhelmed, directionless, and increasingly detached from reality. On the 31st of March 2020, everything changed. That day, Barbara was sitting inside their home, quietly playing the piano. It was a peaceful moment, ordinary in every sense. Ryan entered the room, carrying a firearm. Without warning, he fired a single shot into the back of his mother's head. Barbara died instantly. The violence was sudden, but what followed revealed how disturbed Ryan's state of mind had become. After killing his mother, Ryan did not immediately call for help. Instead, he recorded a video. In the footage later reviewed by the court, Ryan spoke about what he had done. He showed his mother's body. His words were detached, almost unreal, as if he was watching himself from the outside. The next day, Ryan gathered supplies. He loaded his car with weapons, ammunition, and camping gear. Court documents later showed that he had thoughts about committing another attack, possibly targeting a public figure or a crowded location. For hours, he drove across British Columbia alone with his thoughts. But something stopped him. Instead of carrying out further violence, Ryan drove to Vancouver and walked into a police station. Calmly, he told officers, "I killed my mother." Police arrested him immediately. The case shocked Canada. A young actor had killed his own mother, someone who had supported him for years. As the investigation continued, the focus shifted from just the crime itself to Ryan's mental condition. Over the next 2 years, the court examined extensive evidence. Judges reviewed Ryan's journals, the video he recorded after the killing, psychological evaluations, and expert testimony. Mental health professionals explained that Ryan had been battling severe depression and suicidal thoughts. He felt trapped inside his own mind. None of that changed the facts. Barbara Waite was described in court as a loving parent who devoted her life to helping others. The judge spoke about her humanity, her kindness, and the devastating impact of her loss. Family members described her as someone who always tried to protect Ryan even when he was struggling. During court proceedings, Ryan often appeared emotional. He cried while listening to victim impact statements. He apologized repeatedly, saying he wished he could undo what he had done, but remorse could not reverse the damage. In September 2022, the British Columbia Supreme Court delivered its decision. Ryan Grantham was convicted of second-degree murder. Under Canadian law, that conviction carries a mandatory life sentence. The judge ruled that Ryan would serve life in prison with no possibility of parole for 14 years. That meant he would spend at least 14 years behind bars before even being allowed to ask for release. Any decision beyond that would be left to a parole board. The sentence reflected a balance the court was required to strike. The judge acknowledged Ryan's mental illness and his eventual surrender to police, but the court made it clear that none of those factors excused the killing of his mother. For Barbara's family, the pain was permanent. They lost a sister, a daughter, a loved one in an act they could never have imagined. For Ryan, his acting career ended completely. The life he once had disappeared the moment he pulled the trigger. The case left many people unsettled. It challenged assumptions about violence, mental health, and family bonds. A son killed the person who loved him most. A quiet home became the scene of an irreversible tragedy. Ryan Grantham did not flee forever. He did not deny what he had done, but the consequences followed him anyway. One moment destroyed 2 lives, one taken and one condemned, to spend decades behind prison walls. For many television viewers, Michael Jace was a familiar face. He appeared in popular shows and films, often playing serious, authoritative characters. On screen, he looked composed and controlled, someone who seemed dependable. From the outside, his life appeared stable. He had a career, a family, and a home in Los Angeles. Behind closed doors, that image was slowly collapsing. Michael was married to April Jace, a school teacher described by friends as patient, warm, and deeply devoted to her children. Together, they had 2 young sons. To people who knew April, she was the center of the family, the one who held everything together. But inside, the marriage problems had been building for years. Arguments became more frequent, trust eroded, and tension filled the home. By 2014, the relationship was strained to its breaking point. On the night of the 19th of May, 2014, everything unraveled. Inside their home in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Los Angeles, an argument escalated. According to court testimony, Michael confronted April about the future of their marriage. The discussion grew heated. Emotions boiled over. Then Michael picked up a handgun. He shot April multiple times inside their home. She collapsed and died from her injuries. Their 2 sons were inside the house at the time. One of them later told the court that he heard his father speak to his mother before more gunshots rang out. Those moments would stay with the children for the rest of their lives. After the shooting, Michael did something that stunned investigators. He called the police himself. When officers arrived, they found April Jace dead from gunshot wounds. Michael was taken into custody without resistance. The children were placed in the care of relatives. Almost immediately, the case drew public attention. A working actor had just admitted to killing his wife. As the investigation continued, prosecutors began building their case. They examined the crime scene, the weapon used, and the timeline of events. evidence showed that the shooting was not accidental. The number of shots fired and their placement indicated intent. The trial took place in 2016. Inside the courtroom, the focus shifted to what happened during those final moments. Prosecutors argued that Michael acted out of anger and control, not fear. They presented testimony, forensic evidence, and statements that painted a clear picture of domestic violence escalating into murder. One of the most painful moments in court came when the couple's older son, only 10 years old at the time of the killing, spoke about what he heard that night. His words were quiet, but devastating. The courtroom fell silent as he described the sounds that ended his mother's life. Michael's defense attempted to argue that the shooting happened during an emotional breakdown, suggesting that he did not fully intend to kill April. But the jury reviewed all the evidence carefully. The facts did not support that explanation. On the 31st of May 2016, the jury reached its verdict. Michael Jace was found guilty of second-degree murder. Sentencing followed shortly after. On the 10th of June 2016, the judge delivered the punishment. Michael Jace was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. The sentence included additional years because a firearm was used in the crime. Under the terms of the sentence, Michael would not be eligible for parole for decades. In court, Michael apologized. He said there was no justification for what he had done, but his words could not undo the damage. April Jace was gone. 2 children were left without their mother. A family was permanently broken. For April's loved ones, the trial confirmed what they already knew, that her death was senseless and preventable. She had dedicated her life to helping children as a teacher and caring for her own family. Her life ended in a moment of violence that left lasting scars. Michael Jace's acting career ended the night he pulled the trigger. The roles he once played became meaningless compared to the reality he now faced. His name would no longer be associated with television success, but with the crime that destroyed his family. The case served as a stark reminder of how domestic conflict, when combined with anger and access to weapons, can turn deadly. What began as an argument ended as a tragedy that no sentence could ever truly balance. To people who only knew him casually, David Enrique Mesa lived a double life that few could have imagined. In one world, he worked in the adult film industry under the name Mario Romo. In another, he presented himself as a devoted partner, someone capable of loyalty and affection. But beneath both identities was a carefully hidden plan built on deception, money, and betrayal. Mesa became involved with a wealthy man named Jake Clyde Marandino, a Texas resident who believed he had found a genuine relationship. They met online in 2013, and over time Jake grew deeply attached. He trusted Mesa completely. That trust extended beyond emotions into finances. Jake paid for trips, supported Mesa, and eventually made a decision that would later become central to the case. In 2015, Jake purchased a beachfront condominium in Rosarito, Mexico, worth more than $250,000. He also changed his will, naming Mesa as the sole beneficiary of his assets. To Jake, it was an act of love and commitment. To Mesa, according to prosecutors, it was opportunity. At the same time, Mesa was hiding another life. He was living with a woman in California who was pregnant with his child. He lied to both sides, telling each person what they wanted to hear. Phone records later showed that Mesa carefully managed these lies, switching stories depending on who he was speaking to. In May 2015, Mesa and Jake traveled together to Rosarito. Jake believed it was a normal vacation. What he didn't know was that investigators would later describe the trip as the final step in a calculated plan. In the early hours of the 2nd of May 2015, Jake Clyde Marandino was found dead along a roadside between Rosarito and Ensenada. The scene was brutal. He had suffered dozens of stab wounds, including deep cuts to his neck. The violence left no doubt that whoever attacked him intended to make sure he did not survive. Mexican authorities quickly contacted U.S. officials after evidence pointed to an American suspect. As investigators examined phone records, travel logs, and surveillance footage, David Enrique Mesa emerged as the central figure. His phone placed him near the location where Jake's body was found. Border cameras showed Mesa crossing back into the United States shortly after the killing, riding a motorcycle that Jake had given him. Mesa's girlfriend crossed separately in a different vehicle. That detail alone raised serious suspicion. Back in California, Mesa attempted to claim Jake's property using the will that named him as heir. Prosecutors later said this move revealed motive. It wasn't grief driving him, it was money. Federal investigators, including the FBI, built a case based on digital evidence, financial documents, and communications between Mesa and others. They uncovered messages showing deception before the trip and attempts to cover up details afterward. Mesa changed his stories repeatedly. He tried to distance himself from the killing, but the evidence followed him. In court, prosecutors argued that Mesa lured Jake to Mexico under false pretenses, killed him, and then returned to the United States to claim his assets. They described the crime as cold, calculated, and driven by financial gain. The jury agreed. In May 2017, David Enrique Mesa was found guilty of multiple federal charges, including foreign domestic violence, resulting in murder, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The verdict confirmed what investigators had believed from the beginning, that this was not an accident or a crime of passion, but a carefully planned killing. Sentencing followed later that year. A federal judge imposed the maximum penalty allowed by law. Mesa was sentenced to life in prison, with an additional 20 years added for obstruction of justice. The judge described the crime as exceptionally cruel and emphasized the level of planning and betrayal involved. For Jake Marandino's family, the loss was devastating. They spoke about him as a kind, generous man who only wanted to help someone he cared about. That kindness, they said, was exploited in the worst possible way. David Enrique Mesa gained what he sought: access to money and control, but at the cost of another human life. His freedom ended the moment the truth caught up to him. The lies collapsed, the plan unraveled, and the future he thought he had secured vanished inside a federal prison. For years, Fabio Cementilli was known and respected in the beauty industry. He wasn't just a celebrity hairstylist. He was a mentor, an educator, and a public figure admired by professionals around the world. He traveled often, taught classes, and built a reputation based on creativity and trust. From the outside, his life looked successful and secure. Behind that image, however, something was quietly going wrong. Fabio was married to Monica Cementilli. To friends and colleagues, their marriage appeared stable, but investigators would later uncover a hidden relationship that changed everything. Monica had been involved in a long-term affair with Robert Louis Baker, a man who had previously worked in adult films. Their relationship was secretive, emotional, and eventually driven by something darker than passion. On the 23rd of January 2017, Fabio Cementilli was found dead outside his home in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles. He had suffered multiple stab wounds and died at the scene. Inside the house, furniture was moved and items were missing, making the crime initially appear like a robbery gone wrong. But detectives quickly noticed inconsistencies. Some valuable items were left untouched. The disarray didn't feel natural. It looked staged. As investigators dug deeper, they began examining phone records, messages, and financial documents. That's when the hidden relationship between Monica and Robert Louis Baker came into focus. According to prosecutors, the murder was not random, it was planned. Evidence suggested that Fabio's death was tied to a large life insurance policy. Investigators believed that financial gain was a central motive. Messages and digital records revealed coordination, secrecy, and a growing sense of urgency between Baker and Monica. In 2019, after 2 years of investigation, authorities arrested Robert Louis Baker and Monica Cementilli. Both were charged with murder and conspiracy. The case attracted national attention. A respected industry figure had been killed allegedly by the two people closest to him. As the legal process unfolded, another name entered the case. A third man, Christopher Austin, was identified as an additional participant. He later pleaded no contest to second-degree murder and received a sentence of 15 years to life, confirming that the crime involved multiple actors working together. Prosecutors explained that Baker carried out the physical attack while Monica helped plan and support the murder. The home was staged afterward to mislead investigators and buy time, but the digital trail told a different story. Court proceedings stretched on for years. The complexity of the case, the volume of evidence, and the seriousness of the charges meant that every detail was examined carefully. By 2023, the case reached a major turning point. Robert Louis Baker pleaded no contest to first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. He also admitted special circumstances involving financial gain. That plea removed any remaining doubt about his role in the crime. The judge sentenced Baker to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was one of the harshest penalties under California law reserved for the most serious crimes. Monica Cementilli's case continued separately. In April 2025, a jury found her guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. Like Baker, she was convicted of special circumstances tied to financial motive. 2 months later, in June 2025, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. For Fabio Cementilli's family, the verdicts closed a long and painful chapter. Fabio had built a life centered on creativity and connection. His death, they said, was driven by greed and betrayal rather than necessity. Robert Louis Baker and Monica Cementilli once believed they could control the outcome. They believed the crime could be hidden behind a staged scene and a false narrative. But time, evidence, and persistence revealed the truth. What began as a secret affair ended as a carefully planned murder, and the price for that decision was permanent: no release, no second chance, and no way back. To many television viewers, Isaiah Stokes was a confident presence on screen. He appeared in popular series playing tough, self-assured characters who seemed in control of their world. His acting career, while not at the highest level of fame, gave him recognition and steady work. From the outside, his life looked focused and disciplined. But behind that image, a conflict was slowly turning into obsession. In October 2020, Isaiah Stokes and a man named Tyrone Jones crossed paths at a birthday party in Queens, New York. According to prosecutors, an argument broke out between the two men. Witnesses later said the confrontation was tense and emotional. Whatever was said that night did not end when the party did. Instead, it stayed with Isaiah for months. Investigators would later argue that this moment planted the seed for everything that followed. On the 7th of February 2021, Tyrone Jones was sitting inside a parked Jeep Cherokee on a quiet street in Jamaica, Queens. He was waiting for a friend. It was an ordinary moment, one of those pauses in life where nothing seems unusual. Then someone walked up to the vehicle and fired multiple shots through the window. Tyrone Jones was hit several times in the head and body. He died at the scene. At first, the shooting appeared sudden, possibly random, but detectives quickly realized it wasn't. As they examined the case, a pattern began to emerge, one that pointed directly back to Isaiah Stokes. Prosecutors later revealed that in January 2021, weeks before the shooting, Isaiah had placed a small tracking device under Tyrone's vehicle. That device allowed him to monitor Tyrone's movements. Phone records and location data showed Isaiah in the same area as Tyrone on the day of the killing. Security cameras from nearby buildings captured footage of a man walking around the neighborhood for about 15 minutes before the shots were fired. Prosecutors argued that this was not hesitation, it was surveillance. Isaiah was waiting, watching, making sure the moment was right. When the shooting occurred, the evidence began stacking up quickly. Surveillance footage, phone data, and the discovery of the tracking device created a timeline that was difficult to explain away. Investigators concluded that the attack was planned, not impulsive. Isaiah Stokes was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and criminal possession of a weapon. News of the arrest shocked many fans who knew him only from television. An actor with a growing career was now facing life in prison. The trial took place in early 2025. Over 2 weeks, the jury heard testimony from detectives, forensic experts, and witnesses. Prosecutors walked them step by step through the digital evidence. They showed how the tracker was placed, how the phone records aligned, how the video footage captured Isaiah's movements leading up to the shooting. The defense attempted to challenge the interpretation of the evidence. They questioned whether the data proved intent and tried to raise doubts about identification. But the combination of technology and physical evidence told a consistent story. On the 7th of March 2025, the jury reached a verdict. Isaiah Stokes was found guilty of second-degree murder and 2 counts of criminal possession of a weapon. 2 weeks later, on the 21st of March 2025, Isaiah returned to court for sentencing. The judge reviewed the evidence again, emphasizing the planning involved in the crime. The placement of a tracking device, the waiting, and the execution all pointed to a deliberate act. Isaiah Stokes was sentenced to 25 years to life in state prison. Under the terms of the sentence, he must serve at least 25 years before he can even apply for parole. Whether he will ever be released depends on future parole decisions. For Tyrone Jones's family, the sentence brought a measure of justice but no peace. Their loved one had been sitting in his car waiting for a friend, unaware that someone had been tracking him for weeks. His life ended because a conflict from months earlier was never let go. Isaiah Stokes once portrayed strength and control on screen. In reality, he allowed anger and obsession to guide his actions. Technology, which he believed would give him power, became the very thing that exposed him. The case stands as a reminder of how modern crimes leave digital footprints everywhere. Phone data doesn't forget, cameras don't look away, and planning, no matter how careful, leaves traces that eventually surface. A career that took years to build ended in a single moment. One argument turned into months of fixation, and that fixation ended with a life sentence that may never truly end. To most audiences, Shelley Malil was remembered as a harmless comedic presence. He appeared in films and television shows, often playing friendly or awkward characters that made people laugh. One of his most recognizable roles came from a popular comedy where he blended easily into a world built on humor and lighthearted moments. Nothing about his public image suggested violence. But in August 2008, that image shattered. At the center of the case was Kendra Bibi Malil's former girlfriend. According to court records, their relationship had ended, but the emotional attachment had not. On the night of the 10th of August 2008, Kendra was at her home in San Marcos, California, sitting outside on her patio with a friend. It was late, quiet, and ordinary. Without warning, Shelley Malil entered the yard. What followed was sudden and brutal. Prosecutors later explained that Malil attacked Kendra with a knife, stabbing her repeatedly. She was struck more than 20 times. The wounds were severe, covering her chest, back, arms, neck, and hands. 2 of the stab wounds punctured her lungs. Blood loss was extreme. At multiple points during the attack, Kendra believed she was dying. Her children were inside the house at the time. Despite the severity of the assault, Kendra fought back. She screamed for help. Neighbors heard the cries and called emergency services. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital where doctors worked to save her life. Medical professionals later said her survival was nothing short of a miracle. Malil fled the scene. The next day, police located him at a train station in Oceanside, California. He did not resist arrest. Investigators later said he appeared disoriented but cooperative. Prosecutors charged him with attempted premeditated murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and additional related offenses. The case quickly gained national attention. A recognizable actor was now facing charges that could send him to prison for life. The trial began in 2010. Inside the courtroom, Kendra testified about the attack in painful detail. She described the fear, the pain, and the moment she realized she might not survive. Her testimony became a central part of the prosecution's case. Medical reports and photographs confirmed the extent of her injuries. Prosecutors argued that the number of stab wounds and their locations showed intent to kill. They said this was not a momentary loss of control, but a determined effort to cause fatal harm. The evidence, they argued, supported premeditation. Malil's defense offered a different explanation. His attorneys claimed he was confused and panicked, suggesting he believed someone else at the home posed a threat. They argued that his mental state affected his actions. The jury did not accept that explanation. On the 16th of September 2010, Shelley Malil was found guilty of attempted premeditated murder and assault with a deadly weapon. Under California law, these convictions carried severe penalties. In December 2010, the judge sentenced Malil to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Under sentencing guidelines, this is sometimes described as 12 years to life, meaning parole eligibility could be considered after serving a minimum period. At the time, many believed Malil would spend decades behind bars. Kendra Bibi survived, but her life was permanently changed. She required extensive medical treatment and faced long-term physical and emotional recovery. In later statements, she described the lasting impact of the attack not only on herself, but on her children. In 2018, after serving several years of his sentence, Shelley Malil was granted parole. The decision followed multiple parole hearings in which he expressed remorse and acknowledged responsibility for the attack. His release sparked controversy. Many questioned whether someone convicted of such extreme violence should ever be freed. For some, the case ended with his release. For others, it never truly ended at all. Shelley Malil once built a career on laughter and entertainment. That career vanished the moment violence replaced words. His case remains a reminder that survival does not erase trauma, and that justice can feel complicated when punishment and release exist side by side. Kendra Bibi lived, but what she endured will always be part of her story. For years, Timothy J. Bowman lived on the margins of attention. In the adult film industry, he used the name Marcus Allen, appearing in productions that gave him brief visibility but little stability. Behind that public persona, his real life was chaotic, marked by financial trouble and dependence on others. One of those people was John Paul J. P. Kelso. Kelso was a businessman in Denver, Colorado, known by friends and colleagues as generous and dependable. He ran a company called Professional Recovery Systems and often helped people he trusted, including Timothy. Kelso gave Bowman work offered support, and treated him with kindness. Over time, Bowman became familiar with Kelso's routines, his home, and his personal life. That familiarity would later become dangerous. By late 2006, Bowman was convinced that Kelso kept a large amount of cash inside his house stored in a safe. According to prosecutors, Bowman believed that stealing this money would solve his financial problems. What began as desperation turned into planning. On the 13th of November 2006, Bowman went to Kelso's home. What happened inside was never fully witnessed by anyone else, but the outcome was clear. Kelso was shot and killed. His body was later found in the bathtub. The crime scene showed signs that Bowman had searched the house after the killing, possibly looking for documents or items connected to the money he believed existed. After the murder, Bowman fled. He crossed state lines attempting to distance himself from the crime. For several days, he remained on the run, but investigators were already closing in. Phone records, witness statements, and forensic evidence pointed directly to him. On the 16th of November 2006, just 3 days after the killing, police located Bowman near the U.S.-Mexico border in Lukeville, Arizona. He was arrested without incident. During questioning, Bowman gave inconsistent statements. In one version, he suggested the shooting happened during a robbery gone wrong. In another, he implied the gun discharged accidentally during a struggle. Investigators compared his words to the physical evidence. The inconsistencies only strengthened the case against him. As the investigation continued, prosecutors built a clear narrative. They argued that Bowman went to Kelso's home with the intent to steal money and that the killing was part of that plan. Evidence showed that Bowman knew Kelso well enough to anticipate being let inside and that he used that trust to his advantage. The trial began in 2009. Prosecutors presented evidence showing preparation, motive, and escape. They emphasized Bowman's belief that Kelso had significant cash in his actions after the killing, including attempting to flee the country. The defense attempted to raise doubts about intent, but the timeline and evidence left little room for uncertainty. On the 9th of June 2009, the jury reached its verdict. Timothy J. Bowman was found guilty of first-degree murder. Under Colorado law, first-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence. The judge sentenced Bowman to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The ruling meant that Bowman would never be released. During the legal process, Bowman began identifying as a transgender woman. However, the court made clear that this had no impact on the conviction or sentence. The judgment was based entirely on the crime and the evidence presented. For John Paul Kelso's family, the loss was devastating. They described him as a man who tried to help others, someone who did not deserve the fate he suffered. His kindness, they said, had been turned against him in the worst possible way. Timothy J. Bowman once relied on the trust of others to survive. In the end, that same trust became the doorway through which violence entered. His attempt to escape consequences failed, and the plan that was meant to solve his problems ensured that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The case closed without mystery, without unanswered questions, and without mercy. It ended exactly where it began, with greed, betrayal, and a permanent sentence. Across these 10 cases, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Each story begins with a familiar face, a voice people trusted, a name that once felt harmless or even inspiring. Actors, creators, public figures, people who were seen, admired, or followed. And yet behind that visibility, something fractured quietly, long before violence ever surfaced. None of these crimes began at the moment a trigger was pulled or a knife was raised. They began earlier inside unchecked anger, obsession, entitlement, desperation, or the belief that consequences could somehow be avoided. In some cases, the warning signs were subtle. In others, they were painfully clear, ignored, until it was too late. For the victims, there was no script, no second take. Their lives were interrupted in moments they never saw coming, inside homes, inside relationships, inside spaces that should have been safe. What remains afterward is not just loss, but absence. Families forced to rebuild around a silence that never fully fades. Fame did not protect the perpetrators. Money did not save them. Status did not rewrite the truth. In the end, evidence spoke louder than reputation. Digital footprints replaced alibis, witnesses replaced denial, and courtrooms replaced stages. These cases remind us of something deeply unsettling. Evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles, sometimes it performs, sometimes it earns applause before it ever earns a sentence. Justice, when it arrives, is rarely satisfying. It does not undo the harm. It does not restore what was taken. It only draws a line, one that says this far and no further. And when the lights fade, when the headlines stop, What remains are names etched into records, not for what they created, but for what they destroyed. Some stories end, some scars do not. And the echo of these crimes lingers long after the screen goes dark.